Hello, I'm Kads and welcome back to the free-to-play review. We are most definitely in an Irish mood today because of yesterday was of course St. Patrick's Day, and what an honour it is to be celebrating that during the Festival of Creation going on in the game. And in lieu of those celebrations, today's topic is going to be the Festival Titan event and the much anticipated Path of the Clover. But getting serious here, we are going to be talking about the Festival Titan event as well as the Path of the Clover. I considered for a half a second to doing this entire video in my Irish accent, but I thought better of that. Don't want to insult any of the true Irish people in the world, but let me know in the comment section down below how good was that accent. The first item on the docket is the Festival Titan event, and it will be going on for the next 2 weeks or so. And as long as you guys have been playing for a reasonable amount of time, you're fairly familiar with the concept of these Titan events by now. You can consider them to be a mini fusion in terms of difficulty and amount of resources that you would need to invest. So in this case, we have the pretty standard amount at this point, 1500 points with a 250 buffer, meaning there is a grand total of 1750 points across all the events and tournaments that are going to feature the Titan event points. As far as the rewards go, we do have the juicy 5-star split soul here at the top, but for each of the milestones you can get their respective split souls, and so you can work your way up and pick and choose how far you want to go, how far you want to establish his blessings. Obviously 5-star would be the best because it's the closest to 6-star, and you unlock the accuracy and resistance bonus relative to the blessing stats. But of course that will also not be easy or cheap to do necessarily, because it is usually pretty tough, as we have kind of documented over the past few iterations of the Titan event. Now, aside from these souls, we do have some energy, some gems, which is pretty good, ancient shards, some oil, lesser extract, which is pretty useful, greater oil, greater extract, immortal soul coins. I value those pretty highly. More gems, more energy, 6-star chaos ore, superior oil and extract, void shard, immortal soul stone, some dust, which is really good, a legendary tome here at 960, which is relatively cheap comparatively speaking. So typically the 4-star soul has been at 1,000 points, and that was the cap for Titan events. And so getting a legendary tome on your way there to the much more accessible milestone of 1,000 points is pretty solid as well. And then milestone 5, you get the primal shard, get some eternal soul coins, and you have a chance to get yourself a mythical tome and some mythical chaos ore. So the pros of doing the Titan event is that you can earn yourself all the way up to 5-star for the ongoing or / ending fusion for Armand's the Magnificent. Again, I highlighted the cheapness of this legendary tome, but you also would secure yourself a mythical tome. And then of course you also still have the 250 point buffer to kind of pick and choose which events you want to participate in and you want to skip. But the cons, as always, is that this is going to require extra effort. So you're gonna have to participate in artifact enhancements that you otherwise would have skipped in between fusions. You're gonna have to go ham and potentially some dungeon divers. You're gonna have to pull some shards and shard events. So it's always going to require extra effort, on par but slightly less, I would say, than a fusion necessarily in terms of overall resources. But it is going to cost something. So just keep that in mind and decide how far you want to go. Bearing in mind that if you were to opt for milestone 4, for example, that would mean that you'd only have to get 1,000 points out of a grand total of 1,750, meaning that you have a 750 point buffer. So pick and choose how far you want to go depending on your resources and what you're willing to sacrifice and how far you're willing to go, because a 4-star is better than nothing, 3-star is better than nothing, etc. So you can work your way down and find a place that's realistic for you and your account and your progression. And last time we had a Titan event, I asked you guys if you wanted me to track my supply usage over the course of a Titan event akin to what I do for fusions, and a majority of you guys said yes. So we are going to take a snapshot of where we are in terms of supplies at the moment, because I do plan to try and get all the way up to 1,500. But for me and my personal desires, as long as I get to 1,450, I'd be happy. If I missed out on 50, I wouldn't be that fussed about getting the 5-star versus the 4-star soul. But the mythical tome, I do like to acquire as many of those as I possibly can. So if we zoom out of here real quick, you can see that we have 11 million on the silver. It's technically still working on the Armand's fusion at the moment, so stay tuned for the end results of that coming up in a couple of days. And then we're, let's say, 4,050. I like to round to the nearest 50 when it comes to gems. So 4,050 gems, 11 million silver. That's our snapshot or benchmark, and we'll see where we end up at the end of 2 weeks. Now, as a nice segue, unfortunately, the hero's path going on the Path of the Clover does feature some Titan event points, because my original plan was to just skip this Titan event. I plan to get all of the fragments for the fusion through all of the other events, and I didn't necessarily care about the ones featured in the hero's path here, the Path of the Clover. But unfortunately, and we also knew that this was going to be a summon rush and a soul rush, if you want to call it that, so shards and soul stones. And so I personally didn't really want to pull any shards for this, but because they've included some Titan event points, I don't really have much of a choice because of what I just stated about trying to get all the way out to 1500. And especially after the Zinogre Blademaster iteration of the Titan event, I am a little wary of decks of Fate featuring Titan event points because, like I talked about in a free-to-play review way back when we had that, having RNG of flipping cards behind getting Titan event points is really, really painful. So I'm going to try and front load as far as many points as I can get so that I don't get screwed over by a deck of Fate near the end, losing me 50 points and thus losing out on the Perfect Soul or whatever else my goals are. So diving into the path of the Clover, we have a pretty straightforward downward trajectory, and we see that we have two nodes here of the fragments, so 25 and 25, a total of 50 being offered. We do have Grand Oak Padraig, or St. Patrick more or less, featured here, 60,000 points on that particular node, and then we also have a 5-star Perfect Soul for him here, 50,000 points on that node. So if we look around, you can kind of see that there's two keys that you have to get if you want to get to either the champion and or his soul, and they're near here. So you effectively have to get at least one set of the fragments if you do want to open one of the paths, and then you need to get both keys if you want to do both. But let's backtrack a little bit and talk about each of the paths you could possibly take, and I've identified a handful of them that might be enticing to you guys, the players. So the first thing I want to note is that the Titan event points are higher up in the path, thankfully. And so we have a grand total of 200 in this path in total. And so if you just wanted to come down either the left hand or both the left hand and the right hand side and just pick up the Titan event points, which, spoiler alert, is going to be my plan more or less, that's only going to cost you 22,500 points. If you wanted to get the 25 of the fragments, meaning that you only need 25, you don't have to get both, the cheaper side is coming down the left-hand side. And if you were to do so, you would need to gain 24,250 points. If you needed all 50 fragments, meaning you would have to go down both the left-hand and the right-hand side all the way to their respective nodes, that would cost you a grand total of 49,500 points. And if we're talking about the super-duper rewards here, getting a Grand Oak Padraig, or the champion featured, the guaranteed champion featured in this event, you would have to first come down the right-hand side because that is the cheapest way to get the first key, and then you'd have to come down the center path, which is pretty short in fairness, come down the left-hand side, 60,000 point node through the legendary tome, and that would cost you a grand total of 94,750 points. Getting to the Perfect Soul is fairly analogous to that. You still have to come down the right-hand side. Again, that's just the cheaper way. You could go down the left-hand side if you wanted to, it'd just be more expensive, but the cheapest way, come down the right-hand side, grab the key, come down the center, same thing, mirror path, open the key, legendary tome, 50,000 point node here, do the math, 84,750, or 10,000 less than going down the left-hand side and getting the champion. And if you wanted to go all in, all the way, you wanted both of these, basically do the same thing, but you'd have to come down the left-hand side all the way to the key, the right-hand side all the way to the key, and then come down the center, open both halves, get both legendary tomes, and then get the soul and the champion, and that would cost you a grand total of 184,000 points. Now, don't freak out. That was a ton of math and numbers and paths and whatnot, and of course, we are going to hop in to the spreadsheet here so we can see what this looks like, and I've broken it down by each of the paths here with all the nodes along the way to calculate each of them, so you can again refresh your memory on which one you want to go for. Some of them overlap each other and some of them do not. Now, the main thing we want to focus on here is the point acquisition, because I can understand that 184,000 sounds like a ton of points, and it is, in fairness, but this is also again a summon rush combined with a soulstone rush, and so when you break it down in terms of the shards or soulstones you want to use, it becomes a lot more achievable. Not necessarily doable for a majority of people, but it becomes a lot more achievable depending on how much you're willing to spend or how many resources you have saved. So we have the Sacred Shard here being worth 4,500 points. We have the Primal Shard being worth 1,800 points. Void Shard being worth 750. Ancient Shard being worth 300. And then Eternal Soulstone is 7,500. Immortal Soulstone 1,500. And then Mortal Soulstones are 100 a pop. So you can kind of pick and choose which one you want to look at here. But if we're talking about like the best of the best rewards here, getting, all the fusion fragments, you would need to pull, upwards of 11 Sacreds if you wanted to get the champion. Guaranteed champion in this case, 22 Sacreds is what it's going to require. If you wanted the soul, it'd be 19. Although I wouldn't see any reason for you to go for the soul if you're not going to get the champion, because that would be kind of pointless. And that'd be just like pulling him from the soulstone and not actually having the champion. So most people are going to do one or the other or both. And if you wanted to do the champion and the soul, it would cost you 41 sacred shards. Of course, you can break it down by any type of shard, just like the Mishinaki type summon rush way back in the day, where it's a summon rush, meaning you can pick and choose how many of which type of shards you want to use. So if you have 300 ancients and you want to do half of it, half of the entire path with 300 ancients, you have the option to do that. You have the flexibility, and then you would only need 20 sacreds to round it out. Still expensive, of course, but you get to pick and choose how many of each shard you want to use to get your allotted amount of points for whatever your goal may be. And of course, don't forget that there is also the aspect of pulling soul stones, and so you can incorporate again those into however many you want to use for the purpose of this event. Obviously, eternal soul stones are the strongest thing in the game relative to this path, so 700 or 7,500 points per is really strong. So calling out a few things here, if you wanted to go for the champion and you happen to have, which is again ridiculously hard to do, but if you happen to have 13 eternal soul stones, that's all you would need to get the champion, and then you would need a 25, for example, to get both the champion and the soul. So as far as my recommendation, if you are trying to max it out or go pretty far into this, I would probably start with your soul stones and then work back through your shards depending on how far you want to go. I think most people value soul stones below shards still, even though like in the end game I would say soul stones can definitely be more powerful, but you kind of also have to have a strong roster of champions who need said souls to really make them work. And so I think a lot more people are in the position that I'm more in, where it's like, hey, I'm still looking for a good amount of champions regardless of whether or not I have blessings for them or souls for them. As far as my plan is concerned, I already mentioned it earlier, but essentially I'm only doing this just to get the Titan events, so that's only going to cost me 5 sacreds. However, like I said, I will probably pull 6 just because I do want to get as much dust as possible, because I don't typically run Sand Devil that much. I ran it a little bit like last week when we had that turn attack tournament for the summon pool, but that was kind of the first time I actually ran a ton of Sand Devil and got a little bit of dust. But I'd like to get more because I'm re-rolling one piece like 10 times or so now, just trying to get the right substats, and it's just not happening. So as much dust as I can get is nice without actually having to run Sand Devil. And if you're wondering if Grand Oak Padraig is worth it, I think it kind of depends on your account and what you need. He is most certainly up there as far as one of the best ally attackers in the game. He brings in all allies, so that's stronger than like Atlanticus or Akrila, for example. It also fully restores all allies max HP, and it places a continuous heal on them 4-turn cooldown, which is pretty standard for ally attack champions. He also has this ability here with a full a turn meter fill of 20%, and then a full cleanse with increased speed, so pretty solid on a 3-turn cooldown. And then on the A1 has a chance of decreasing the cooldown of a random ally skill, active skill, by 2 turns. Cannot speak today. And the passive is pretty cool that whenever he takes a turn, he places the correct buff for the type of champion who needs it. So increased attack for an attack-based, increased defense for defense-based. So he can be a really nice setup for basically any type of champion in the game. Now, personally, I have Lonatharil, who is a previous fusion. I have Ferric the Fat, so my ally attack is basically covered. Obviously, I'm working towards Lady Mikage, so she would be a third option as far as my account is concerned. Now, he would probably be useful for me in some rotation of the Cursed City for like some Fire Knight thing, but honestly, like pulling 20 something sacreds for a champion to use for maybe one stage of Soul Cross hard is just that's not really what I want to use my shards on. So that's not saying that he's a bad champion. He's just not worth it for that use case. I would need to use him in a lot more areas, and for my account where I'm at, I don't have a use for him in a lot more areas than just a couple of stages in Centranos. The other important thing to mention, of course, is that there is a progressive chance events going on for today, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, so 3 days worth, which featuring different champions. I think today is the increased resistance champions, tomorrow is some ally protector champions, and then the third day is champions who can steal or remove buffs. Now, I'm not going to go over all the champions featured on the events. You guys can do that research on your own. There are plenty of other content creators that have covered that in great detail, and you can kind of pick and choose which day you want to participate in. I've seen a lot of people trying to go for Fearall the Barkhorn or whatever his name is on today's stuff. For me personally, I guess Grazer Ironguard as far as for the voids as well. It's pretty enticing for a lot of people. But for me, one of my most wanted or most desired champions is actually Snicktrock, who's going to be on the 15x or progressive chance for tomorrow. So that's when I am going to be pulling my Sacreds. I think Fearall is pretty good for Hydra. You know, he has the perfect veil, increased resistance, so a lot of capabilities. but my Hydra teams are pretty set. Again, this is me and my account and what I need, and he just doesn't really fit. I don't really need him. He'd be nice to have, but he wouldn't be necessary. Snick Track is not really a need either, but he is a champion that I want because I would like to try him out in Iron Twins because he has a lot of really cool abilities and passives that should work really well in that dungeon. So yeah, that's going to do it for this free-to-play review of the Festival Titan event as well as the Path of the Clover. Let me know in the comment section down below, how far do you plan to go in the Titan event, milestone 3, 4, 5, etc. And let me know what you're going to do for the Path of the Clover. Are you all in for the guaranteed champion? Are you half in for some other reward? Are you super in for the champion and the soul? Let me know all of that in the comment section down below. As always, if you did find this video helpful, then be sure to hit that like button down below. It really does help out the channel. And if you did enjoy the video, then be sure to subscribe to the channel for more content just like this one in the future. Thanks for watching and have a good one.